Aloha and welcome to the Energy Flow Through the Ecosystems video. In this video, we will name the different ways organisms get their energy. We'll identify the different roles in a food chain or a food web, and then finally we'll describe an ecosystem using an energy pyramid. So one of the big questions for living things is how do you get your energy to live? Well, we have two basic ways that we can do this. The first is you can be an autotroph. And an autotroph is called that because it's able to make its own food or get its own energy. And a lot of these are going to be phototrophs, which means they use light to get this energy and convert it. So we're talking about autotrophs. Mainly what we're going to talk about is like the grass you see here, our plants. Our plants are phototrophs. They take the energy in sunlight and they convert that into chemical energy that the cells can then use later on for the processes of living. Now, if you're not an autotroph, that would mean you are a heterotroph. And an heterotroph gets its energy from the food that it eats. And we and the cow that you see down here are what we call chemotrophs because we get our energy from chemicals. And primarily the energy that we get is going to come from glucose or the sugars which the phototrophs make from the sunlight in the process of photosynthesis. Okay, what you see here are a couple examples of food chains. And what a food chain shows us is the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So we have to take the energy that's out there in the non-living part of the ecosystem and then find a way to convert it so it is usable for the rest of the organisms there. And a food chain shows us this flow of energy. Most food chains are going to start here with a producer, and for most of them we'll use a plant. That plant's going to take the energy from the sun and convert it into chemical energy in the form of sugar. Now, from those producers, we get into the nature of a consumer. And a consumer consumes something to get its energy and its resources, so it has to eat. In here, on our terrestrial, our land example, we have a primary consumer of a cricket, which is going to eat the grass. Then we move up to a secondary consumer, which is the frog, which will then eat the grasshopper. And then we have our tertiary consumer up here, which is our bird of prey, which is going to feed on the frogs. Now we can have the same type of situation in an aquatic environment where we have our seaweed or our water plants, which are going to be fed upon by a small fish, which is going to be our primary consumer. And those small fish in turn are eaten by larger fish, and that larger fish is going to be eaten by a pelican or a larger bird, which would be our tertiary consumer. So when we're talking about these food chains, we're always going to start off with some kind of a producer. That's going to put the energy into the ecosystem, so in a usable format for the animals to use, and then those producers are going to be eaten by consumers. And we'll have primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, depending on how far away it is from the producer. Now, nature doesn't work in straight lines very often, so the food chains are nice because it gives us a small picture that we can trace. But in reality, most of what we're going to see is going to take in the place of what we call, or what we see here as a food web. And our food web is going to take our food chain. So if we remember our last food chain, we had our producer here, our primary consumer, secondary, and tertiary. So this was our food chain. Now that's not the only way that energy is going to flow. If we look at our hawk here, it's going to eat frogs, but it'll also eat other things. So we can add to it that it'll eat mice and it'll eat birds. And that leads us to, well, what do the mice eat? And in the case here, our mice are eating this plants with seeds, but if we know mice, we know that they'll also eat an insect if they can get it. They'll also eat a worm if they can find it. So we can start seeing some different things here. We have our birds, and our birds will eat the insects as well, and they'll eat the plants, and they can eat the worms. And then what do worms eat? Worms are going to eat the bacteria in the soil. And what's that bacteria? It's going to feed on dead organisms, and those dead organisms are going to be all of these ones that weren't eaten or weren't fully digested. So you can see how it gets a lot more complex, and when we put all these food chains together, we can create what we call a food web, and that's what you see here. Now the last visual representation we'll show of energy flowing through an ecosystem is what we call an energy pyramid. And you see an example of it here. Now we start with some kind of external energy source, and we don't put it into the pyramid because normally these external sources are what we would call limitless. So the amount of energy in the sun is limitless for us. The plants can't use all of it. The sun's not going to run out of energy, and when it does run out of energy, we won't be around. So it's not like it's ever going to run out. It's a never-ending supply, so it's a limitless supply. So that energy flowing in, we don't worry about, but we'll notice that that energy flowing in is going to happen at the lowest level here. So 100% of the energy that's fixed or taken from the sunlight is going to reside down in this level here where we have our producers. Now as we go up levels in the pyramid, you see they get smaller, and what happens is we see a reduction in the amount of energy there. So if we have 100% of energy in the plants, only 10% of that energy is going to move up to the next level. And the reason for that is plants have to perform their functions to live. So they have to grow, they have to do all of their cellular processes. So it takes 90% of the energy just for life. And that's just our rough estimate. So we always say that when we're looking at these levels, 90% of the energy that they acquire is used for living, and then 10% is going to move forward. So if we look at our grasshopper here, it's going to take 90% of the energy that it consumes from eating the producers and send 10% on. So we see what's 10% of 10%? That's going to be 1% of energy moves on to the birds here. And they're going to use 90% of that energy and send up only 10%. So by the time we get to a tertiary consumer, it's getting 1/10 of 1% of the energy that was created, not necessarily created, but fixed by the plants. So every time we take a step up, we lose 90% for living. Only 10% is going to move up from level to level. Okay, so that's it for this video. They'll go into what we covered in a lot more depth in the lessons. So good luck with the lessons, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.